I would like to talk about the future of architecture. And if you think about the future of architecture, of course, you think about glass buildings, skyscrapers, office buildings. But for me, the future is always hidden in the most simple things, in the most ordinary elements. I think that if you look at how people live in today's moment, you are going to understand much more about the future than if you look at technologies and skyscrapers. So one of the things that are most inspiring for me here in Kyiv, every time I come here, are the balconies. I mean, just look at this slide, right? You can see that somebody was really dissatisfied with their flat. They're like, oh, I hate my flat, I need another room. I'll make it on the balcony, and they just do it. And the other one is like, oh, I really need a storage space. I'll do it on the balcony, and they just do it. But then you have other kinds of people where it's not so much about functionality, it's much more about self-expression, right? I'm not like everyone else. I'm modern. I'm traditional. This is what they say. And then I was driving from the railway station here, and I saw all these balconies, this mosaic of uniqueness, individuality, self-expression. And I'm being a little bit provocative because I know that in Ukraine, people hate it. I really know. I've heard it, like, the last week I've spent it in Ukraine, and I've heard people talking about it every day, saying, like, this is so bad. Well, I believe it's really nice. I believe this is something very important, because if you look at it, what you can see is that people are changing space around them. They are not afraid to do this. They just go and change it. They have initiative. So what is the problem? Well, the problem, it's obvious, it's ugly. It's like extremely ugly, right? But this ugliness, for me, is a symptom of a much, much deeper problem. For me, as a professional, a theorist of architecture, this is a symptom of a lack of communication. So if you look at these slides, you can see architecture as a collective form. It was created by very many actors. There was an architect building a Khrushchevka. Then there was one person changing the balcony, another one, everybody was changing. So it's a collective form, a lot of voices. But the problem is that there's no dialogue between these voices, right? Nobody was talking to it. It's this kind of conversation that all of us know, where we sit at the table, everybody is telling their story and nobody listens, right? There's no communication. So the big question of this lecture is, how is it possible that we are here in 2018, we all have these, we all have all communication technologies that we need, but in architecture, the very thing that is broken is communication. How is it possible? So in order to answer this question, I have to go back in history to 1954. I think it's impossible to understand the state we have today, or we are in today, without understanding the history. So the person that you can see on the slide is Nikita Khrushchev, who in 1953 replaced Joseph Stalin as the leader of the Soviet Union. And he inherited a huge problem, the housing crisis. There were millions of people that had nowhere to live, and it had to be fixed very, very quickly. So what Khrushchev did, already after 1 year, in December 1954, he decreed that all architecture will be industrialized. What does it mean? It means that from this moment on, buildings were produced in factories, like shoes or other products, and then they were brought to the construction site and assembled there. So these huge factories of houses were built in very, very many cities. What did it mean for architecture? Well, architecture at this point, it met the industrial age. It was propelled into the industrial age. But what it really meant for architecture was simplification. Industrial age, it's all about repetition. You need to repeat endlessly one thing to make it cheaper and more simple to produce. So very quickly, the series of houses appeared, typical houses. And then the number of typical houses was made it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Then number of elements each typical house is built of was made smaller and smaller and smaller. So in here you can see this is probably the most notorious design of the Khrushchev era, the so-called Khrushchevka. It's a building that is meant for 60 families. It's made of not more than 2 dozen of elements, which are produced in one day. So it's from the point of view of the industrial age, of the factory, it's pure beauty. But what followed this was also the change in the philosophy or in the aesthetics. What Khrushchev was accenting in his decree, in his speech about this new architecture, was simplicity, that the aesthetics has to be simple. Like, we don't need any decoration. It has to be simple so that it's honest. And simplicity became the language of architecture of the production age. And this was very much aligned with what was happening in the world at that point, right? We all know the words of one of the most famous Western architects, Mies van der Rohe, who in 1947 said, less is more, meaning the new aesthetics is very, very simple, minimalism. The other thing that happened, I think it was even more important. Khrushchev used his old political power to align different elements of the state to produce houses. So it was not only the factories of houses, it was also design offices. They were consolidated, they became so big and hierarchical. It was also education, it was also all elements of production of architecture. It created an ecosystem which was informed by this industrial age. And this ecosystem, it created this new landscape that we all know. If I asked you, which city is it? Do you know? Well, it can be any city. I like this photo much better because this is a very rare juxtaposition of a Khrushchevka and a cowboy. You don't see it often, but this is Cuba. This is the city of Pasacaballos in Cuba. So what happened is that this system, this Khrushchevka and other series of houses that appeared later, they spread around the world. They spread around the socialist countries. And if we think about today, like 60 years past, Khrushchev is long gone, Soviet Union is long gone, thanks God. And theoretically, everything changed, right? We have smaller offices, we have the market of building materials, we have everything. But I think that the very mentality of the industrial age, that first you produce something and then you give it away to people, right? So there is no communication between the producer or the designer and the user. I think that this mentality is still here. We hear about a lot of experiments about participation, for example, or participatory budget, but I think that they don't touch the essence. They are just like decorative elements. But in general, contemporary architecture is still being produced and then given to people. So the big question is there any historical example when the whole ecosystem was challenged? Well, I know one. This is what I call the architecture of solidarity, a phenomenon which I have researched, co-researched with my colleagues Karolina Popera and Iza Cichońska. We wrote a book about this. And this is something completely different. So in 1980 in Poland, in my home country, there were huge strikes of workers in the shipyards in the north of Poland, in the mines in the south of Poland. The workers were demanding much better working conditions. And very quickly, these strikes, they converted into an uprising, let's say a popular uprising against the communist government. So the anti-communist intelligentsia, the Catholic Church, and the workers, they aligned, they formed an alliance against the state, and they were all protesting. They were protesting in the shipyards and other factories. And after a few months of protests, the communist government had to make concessions. So They just had to draw back, and make concessions. And they did make a lot of concessions. And one of them, which was extremely interesting, was about architecture. They allowed to build churches, something that sounds absurd, a communist country that is nominally atheist, and church construction. But what is interesting about this is that allowing it, giving a building permit, was not the same as letting the Catholic Church use the infrastructure of the church. The permits were given, but the people who wanted to build their churches, they were not allowed to go and use the factory, the big office. They were not allowed to use the building machinery or materials. So what happened is that they just met on the construction site and started figuring out together what to do. So the architect comes and says like, wow, I want to build this. Look, this is a great design. And I need red stone. And somebody is saying like, look, we don't have red stone. But I know someone who knows someone who has bricks. And the architect is like, cool, bricks. And then he's like, but we need this and that machinery. Well, we don't have machinery, but I know someone who knows someone that has a machine that's a little bit different. So every conversation resulted with an alteration of the idea. Moreover, the form of architecture was very much influenced or even informed by who was living in the parish. I will give you a few examples. So in here you can see a construction site in one of the parishes in Wrocław, my hometown, where stone masons lived that were extremely skilled. And they made all these beautiful details from stone and brick, something that is incomparable to anything that was built at that time. In another parish in the south of Poland, in Krakow, there were other skilled people who knew how to work with wood. And they made scaffoldings of wood, and they made these elements of wood that let them lay concrete in a very beautiful way. Then there was another parish where mathematicians were living, like a team of mathematicians, right? And they helped the architects to create this extremely complicated geometry. So you can see that this communication, it actually allowed for new ideas to appear. So to sum up the short story about the churches, in the 80s, in Poland, we had two architectures that were different. In here, this is actually a very interesting photo. You can see buildings that are designed by the same architects in the same time, yet they look very different because of the system that produced them. So on the one hand, we have this architecture of efficient industrial production, where the quality of the industrial process is informing the quality of architecture. And on the other hand, we have this architecture of efficient communication, where the quality of dialogue between people is informing the outcome. So 1.5 years ago, I had this conversation in Ukraine with my friends, Andrzej and Katya, who are leaders of an NGO, Kultura Medialna in Dnipro. And I told them the story. And I finished asking a question like, do you think it would be possible to repeat it? Look, we are living in this age of communication. We have all the tools to make it more efficient. Like the church builders, they didn't even know that they are part of this architecture of a dialogue. And now we know it, so we can deliberately design communication in the way we want. Wouldn't it be really nice to try it? I asked rhetorically. Well, let's do it, they answered. It appeared that they are organizing a festival called Construction, and they wanted, after a few years, to build something for the citizens of the city, together with the citizens of the city. They had the site in the park, in the Shevchenko Park in Dnipro, which was an abandoned amphitheater. It was a Stalinist amphitheater that was built in the 1930s, and then it burned down during the Second World War, and they had an idea to make a public space there, together with the people. And they said, look, you have a method, we have our community, let's just experiment. This is actually something that I really like about Ukraine after the Maidan. Everybody wants to experiment, right? Let's build something, let's do it. So Andrzej and Katya, they reached out to their community. They collected people who were willing to participate. I reached out to my community. I'm a nerd. I reached out to my community of architect friends and told them, look, there's this experiment. You can try to come and help us, but it will be very messy. I don't know how it will work out, but it will definitely take a lot of power from the hands of the architect. You will have to do it with the people. And some of my architect friends said, you're crazy. It's not going to work. The others said, it's not going to work, but I will try. And the others said, wow, great, I will try. So we actually collected a huge group of people, and then we started designing together using all possible techniques and methods that we know from the digital age: crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, collective design, like a lot of them. I will just give you 2 examples how it looked like. So first, we had the space and we had the people, but we didn't know what exactly we want to do there, right? You can simply make order or put some benches, but what should this space do? So I built a very simple tool where I asked the question, what would you like to do there? Name 25 things. And Andrei and Katya, they disseminated this question, they asked their community, and we got thousands of answers. Of course, 80% of them were quite obvious. Like, people like doing obvious things. I want to go to the park, I want to sit there with the friends, I want to have a beer, I want to, I don't know, maybe watch a movie. But then there was 20% of answers that were really, really interesting. So we started focusing on them and trying to look for a common denominator. And we found it. It appeared that people wanted to have agency. They wanted to get involved, do something, organize something. So out of all these hundreds of answers, we created a very short brief. We want to create a stage for civic activity, a space where anyone can organize their own event. Very, very simple. But then the funniest part was how to design it. Normally, when you design something, an architect is responsible for the form. The architect, we are taught that an architectural form, a building, should be one gesture. So you have this one beautiful gesture, and then the building appears out of that. Which is not true, as we saw with the balconies, right? The one gesture is just in the beginning, but then there's like many gestures. So in here, we wanted to change this philosophy, and we said, okay, so everybody should give an idea. Like, everybody is allowed to chip in with an idea, and all the ideas are valid, all of them. All good ideas are valid. And then the role of the architect is just to put them together and make something consistent out of this. So somebody said, like a local producer of playgrounds in Dnipro said, well, we know how to make an amazing wooden structure. Okay. Then there was somebody who said, we need to build this huge acoustic tube, like in the old gramophones, which can mechanically amplify the sound. So if somebody organizes an event, they can actually switch to the tube. And there was this Danish architect who said, well, I can calculate it. I know parametricism. I will just do all the calculations. Then somebody said, we need local plants. And the local botanic garden in Dnipro said, we will give you plants. And the local landscape architect said, okay, I will design these plants, I will show you how it can be done. And then the Polish landscape architect said, let's choose the plants that attract butterflies, so it's going to be more beautiful. So we had all these ideas coming. There was another one about iconic shape. There was this Italian architect that said, we have to simplify the form to something extremely iconic. I will help with that. So everybody has an idea, but how to do it? There's like more and more. We actually had a lot of ideas coming. So it all fell on this guy, Tomasz Świetlik, the architect, who was the master builder of it. He was responsible for putting all these things together. The idea was to express everybody's work in the form, but still have consistency. Something like a mosaic. In a mosaic, you have many different elements, but they sum up to something very, very coherent. The coherence comes out from diversity. So we needed this kind of mosaic. And I think that he did extremely well. It's very coherent, it's very beautiful, it's very simple, but all the ideas are there. So if you take a look from the other side, there's also this list of people who built it and participated in very different things. And it actually works. So what can we actually learn from this? Was it worth it? We bothered a lot of people, right? Normally we would go to a sponsor and say, like, give us $1 million or $100,000, we'll build something. What do we gain from the fact that we bother so many people? Well, first thing, it's something very original. I told you we are building a stage. Have you ever seen a stage like this? It's something very original. It's unique, and it's based very much on the ideas that were produced. Very much like the churches I showed you before. They were also very, very original. The second thing is that this architecture is resilient. I was talking about the balconies. People don't feel that the form that was there initially was theirs, so they change it. But in here, it was different. Like, everybody who participated, they had a feeling of ownership of this. So, for example, there was this moment when the stage had to start working. We promised that it's going to be the stage where everybody can organize their own event, but will they? Well, the people who participate in construction, the last year, they organized 60 events in 2 months. I think it's quite a lot. It's more or less like one a day. And groups of friends and friends. This was actually the applause for them, not for me. So groups of their friends were coming and meeting each other. A lot of people met each other. There was even one relationship that started at stage, as I know. But it actually worked. Like, there was this movement. People owned this, and they wanted to organize something. They were coming to organize something. And there were actually, I'm showing you the mosaic, there were very many events. What is really nice for me is that I wouldn't participate in some of them, and I would participate in some other. That means it was very inclusive. Everybody was allowed, and some of the events would fit my taste, some of them would not. I think it's a very, very great sign. But the other thing about resilience is that at some point, stage was vandalized. 2 or 3 weeks after it was constructed, somebody just destroyed parts of it during the night. And very quickly, there appeared this invisible hand reconstructing it. It very quickly became what it was before. So this resilience is very important. People felt, the community felt that it was theirs, and they actually were taking care of this. Another thing is that this building this year was awarded a prestigious prize, the Urban Public Space Prize. Out of 300 projects all over Europe, 5 or 6 were chosen, amongst them Stage. And I would like to say it was my idea to submit Stage to this competition. It wasn't. I wasn't aware of that. The community was so strong that they actually said, let's do it. We can do it. And they submitted and they won. So I think that this is something very, very important. So to sum up my presentation, coming back to the balconies, the next time you see them, please don't think badly of the people who built them. They're actually active people that want to express something, that want to participate in shaping the space around them. So the next time you see them, please think, well, communication is broken. We have to do something about it. Thank you.